Welcome to our YouTube channel. We're so glad that you found us. Please enjoy this inspiring second interview with Dr. Piers Salguero. He was interviewed by Yvonne Unger. If you would like some more information about Piers, please visit his website at multidharma.net. For more information on our non-dual community and the free resources we provide, we invite you to visit our website at awakening-together.org. We hope you enjoy the satsang and hope to see you live in the sanctuary. Yeah, welcome to the second part of that satsang with Piers and the threads of awakening, and happy to have you back, Piers.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. So if you haven't watched the first satsang yet, we highly recommend you to do so, because there we already talked about the model. And we also announced last time that we would speak about the Psyche thread, as it is one of the most underrated threads within all traditions. But then we realized that there seemed to be still some open questions regarding the model. And so we decided to focus a bit more on the model itself, and then we see how far we get. And today we will dive deeper into the process and all the things that can happen along the way. And for the ones who haven't been here last time, just a quick summary of that model. So what the threads of awakening are is a map, and the map has the threads, and the ones that we use are 4 threads, which is emptiness thread, oneness thread, energy thread, and psyche thread. And what is a thread? A thread has a trajectory, so it opens up with a first remarkable experience, spiritual experience, mystical experience. And usually this is exactly what you also find in other traditions. That's called, like, for instance, first awakening. But then it goes further. There's a deepening of every thread, and then there's an end point of every thread. And the interesting thing about the threads is that every thread has its own experiences, its own identity, its own ontologies and worldviews. And like in real life, when you have threads, you can imagine you have different threads, you can braid them to a braid. And that's exactly what also happens according to the model. And the experiences people share when they have threads open is a braiding process. So they will all like come together. And at the same time, there's not just the braiding of the threads, there's also deepening of each thread. So basically you have 2 or even more processes going on at the same time. That's what I just found out when I summed up the model. It can sound a bit complicated. And what we want to do is to try to give you examples, maybe some sharings or experiences that help you to understand what this braiding process is. And then there are more processes to come, but we start with the braiding. And so I hand it over to Piers. And yeah, what's the braiding process?
Thanks, Yvonne. Yeah, I like hearing you talk about the threads model, this multi-dharma model, because you understand it as well as I do. So, great to hear, when you talk about it using different words than what I talk about sometimes. So it's fun to hear it reflected back. Um, but yeah, thanks for having me back, and happy to kind of pick up where we left off. I guess one more thing that I might want to emphasize from the just sort of summarize from last time is we talked a lot about why we might want a new model, and this model is not claiming to be sort of like a more accurate or better or more truthful model. It's just claiming to be an alternative model to help people understand what they're going through, if they have tried other models and found them not to really work out that well. So if you've been in, say, like a Buddhist or a Hindu or a whatever tradition that has a certain model with stages of awakening, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., and you're having trouble fitting into that, you're having experiences that are not part of the model, having experiences out of order from the model, this is a model that just kind of tries to do away with step by step thinking about awakening and just approach it in a different way. Kind of like, I thought of a new metaphor. It's kind of like if you're used to listening to music and you hear the song and you're like, oh, there's a verse and then a chorus and then a verse and then a chorus and then the bridge and then a verse and then a chorus, and you're used to carving it up that way. This model is actually having you just listen to the bass line for the whole song and then play it again and listen to the guitar line for the whole song all the way through. And so it's slicing the awakening process a different way just to hear something new, right? Just to find something new. And for some people, what we've discovered is that, cutting things up in a different way suddenly makes sense of their experiences, and that can turn what has been a difficult, challenging, confusing experience into something that is like, oh, I now have a map for this, and um, suddenly things make sense. So that it's really a tool for people to use to, try it on, see if it helps to make sense of some confusing things. If not, great, just discard it. Um, if it's helpful, awesome. Use it, modify it, adjust it. Do whatever you want with it. Um, the purpose is just to kind of help people to sort of place themselves within a larger framework. And we talked about how that can also help to avoid things like spiritual emergency, spiritual crisis, other kinds of um, issues that arise when people feel lost in this process. So yeah, so I just wanted to add that to the intro. Um, right. So braiding. Uh, so where we left off with the last session was we really focused on these four threads and talking about the initial awakening experience, the deepening into the threads, how each thread kind of is a trajectory that deepens. We talked about the kind of the experiential side or the phenomenology, the things that can happen, what it feels like to be working down the threads, and where the threads end up. And so we don't want to spend a lot of time going back and rehashing that. So we want to point people to the part one video. But just super quickly to say that the ends of the threads are, the trajectory of the emptiness thread is seeing through things, seeing through every last seemingly real thing and realizing that it's empty, realizing that it's, deconstructing it, de-reifying it, realizing that it's ultimately just a concept, and arriving at a place where your experience is of complete and total emptiness, unrealness, even the stopping of the consciousness itself, and just having a kind of like a blank out, blackout kind of experience. Oneness thread is going down in an opposite direction. It's going in a more inclusive direction, expanding the self, expanding one's experience to include more and more and more within a field, within, seeing it all as part of the same field. Could be you use the word God, it could be you use the word consciousness, it could be you use the word like life or the universe. Different people language it differently, but you arrive at the place where every last um, aspect of the cosmos, every last aspect of experience is all part of the same thing, the same one. Energy thread is opening up with some energetic experiences, maybe things like Kundalini, maybe things like prana, etc. But then more and more and more of experience, more and more of reality dissolving, every last thing that seems solid dissolving into kind of a pulsating, um, uh, you know, disappears before it appears kind of potentiality. Um, every last particle, every last experience is one of just potential energy. And then the psyche thread, this is the one that I'm doing something different here than um, a lot of other models, because I'm pulling together things that people might think of as really separate, but I'm putting them together here. So these are things like um, both from psychology, both from shamanism, from other kinds of traditions. Uh, the point of the psyche thread is the awakening out of the narrative self. I used to think I was just pierced. Now I see that actually this being, this organism, this self, this me how much of it is being driven by processes that were previously unconscious to me. So I previously thought, the ego thought that it was all under control, but actually it turns out so much of the self, um, it's either unconscious conditioning, it's karma, it's past lives, it's astral, like information being downloaded from some kind of plane, or it's spirits or spirit or soul. People have tons of different ways of talking about this, but the idea is to see more and more and more of what I thought was real, what I thought was me, what I thought the world was, what I thought my experience was, actually is conditioned, actually is the product of my unconscious, the product of unconscious patterns. And the trajectory here, just like all the other ones, ends with the realization that every last nanosecond of experience, every last thing that I could possibly find, even the one that's trying to find, every last thing is conditioned. Reality is a projection of this being. So that's a psyche thread. And so these threads are emphasized in different traditions. You could look around the world and look at different traditions and see like, oh, I can see how Theravada Buddhism is emphasizing the emptiness thread. Christian mysticism is emphasizing the oneness thread. Different forms of, Jungian psychology are emphasizing the psyche thread. You have Kundalini yoga, different kinds of like Taoist traditions that really emphasize the energy thread. Different traditions, different teachers, different teachings are maximizing different kinds of experiences, based on which thread they value. They define enlightenment differently, they define awakening differently. They define what you should and shouldn't be working on experiencing differently, depending on which thread they emphasize. And this model is just taking a step back and just kind of laying out the territory and saying, look, there's this larger territory that includes all of these threads. So it's an inclusive model, trying to make sense of kind of like an umbrella theory or an umbrella model of awakening traditions and what they value. And so when we talked last time, we talked about the threads like I just did as kind of like separate things. And that's really just to help to kind of parse things out. It's an artificial picture for most people to think of them separately, because it's more just sort of like to be able to um, recognize these different flavors, separate them out. It's helpful for clarity. It's helpful for understanding what different traditions are doing, what different teachers are talking about. But I think in actual experience, certainly in my experience and in the experience of almost everybody I've talked to, not every person, but almost every person I've talked to, has some kind of braiding going on, some kind of combination of more than one thread. So I have met several people who have had a single thread awakening. They just like go down one thread. That's their whole process, is deepening deeper and deeper into that thread. But even those people will wind up braiding whatever thread they're on together with what I call the daily life thread. Um, so that's kind of the fifth thread that I don't remember how much we talked about last time, Yvonne. I don't think it was very much, but
Yeah, we mentioned at the beginning there a 4.5 thread or maybe five,
yes,
and then we didn't talk about the fifth one.
didn't
And
clarify.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to mention that. Also
Yeah.
because you
So
think it's just half of a thread because it's a bit like has a special position in the
it's yeah, it's not a thread of awakening. It's not a spiritual thread. I use the word thread to refer to daily life because it works with the braiding metaphor. So this daily life, work, paying the bills, kids, taking care of the dogs, getting the car repaired, paying the rent, that kind of stuff. Um, the world of the ego, you could say, the world of the narrative self, the world where Pierce has roles to play and duties to perform and has to show up in certain ways in professional settings or in social settings or whatever. That whole thing, it's not a spiritual thread, but let's just use the metaphor of threads. Let's just call it a thread, for the purposes of this kind of braiding metaphor. So in that case, you could say that every awakening, even if there's only one spiritual thread happening, every awakening is going to involve some kind of braiding process, right? So in the case of a one-threaded awakening, it's going to be you're opening up to all of, let's say it's an emptiness awakening. You're opening up to all of this realization about how much of this, um, world that I thought was real is actually just concepts. How much of this, these objects out there are really just, uh, these phenomena are really just, empty and not really present. Um, you can be deepening and deepening into that, but eventually you're going to start braiding that together somehow with your life. I mean, maybe you just decide, okay, my life is over. I'm going to go live in a cave somewhere, become a monk somewhere, and just like, meditate for the rest of my life. But even so, you're going to be relating with other people. You're going to be eating food. You're going to be, you know, normal bodily functions. So you cannot escape the daily life thread. And so, um, one threaded awakening, you're going to be somehow interweaving your spiritual insights with the daily life. But in a multi-thread awakening, which is actually most people, it's going to be more complicated. Um, let's say you have an emptiness thread type experience that opens up a trajectory into deeper and deeper into emptiness. So let's say you also have an opening of the oneness thread, and there's a deepening into the oneness experience. So the reason I call it braiding is because for most people, there seems to be and when I say for most people, I mean for most people that I've talked to a lot of people about their process, and I, listened to a lot of people describe awakening on YouTube, and I've spent decades studying Asian traditions through scriptures and other kinds of writings, historical writings. So I'm making a generalization based on kind of my experience. I am recently have gotten involved with an actual research project where we're actually going to be doing more kind of like social science research on awakening, and I might have more detailed or more precise statistics to share at some point in the future. But for now, I'll just say kind of generally speaking, in my experience, most people have this braiding process taking place with more than one spiritual thread plus their daily life. And what that might look like is so the reason I call it braiding is if you can imagine the threads and you're braiding them like you're braiding hair or something, right? Like there's one thread goes on top and the other ones are underneath it. And then the next thread comes on top and the other ones go underneath it. And then the next thread comes on top, right? And so using that metaphor to sort of as a visual, most people who are having an awakening process are um, having, let's say, an emptiness experience that becomes the primary thing that they're really focused on. It's the primary thing that they're really noticing. It's the primary part of their awakening experience that emptiness really is at the foreground, and the other things kind of drop to the background. Daily life seems like, oh, it's just kind of like I can't really manage that right now. I can't really focus on that right now, or everything seems unreal. I kind of a retreat from daily life because like this emptiness experience is so powerful. Um, but then let's say like 6 months later, start having a oneness experience type thing, and it's like, where did the emptiness go, right? The emptiness like that seemed so real, that seemed so foregrounded, 6 months ago, now it's just is now washed away by this like unity with God or unity with love or unity with the universe or something like that. Um, and that feels like really, really vibrant and present and foregrounded for a while. Maybe then something happens, like there's a crisis at work or something with one of the kids, or the car breaks down, or like whatever, something in daily life. Now, suddenly, boom, the daily life thread is back on top, right? And it's like, I don't have time for spirituality right now. I'm just focused on, what's going on at work. Like all the spirituality takes a back seat because the kind of daily life is now in focus. And that happens for a while. And then, next thread, next thread, next thread. And it's this sort of like sequential kind of oscillation between the threads that you have open. During that process, maybe another thread opens, like you're doing that kind of braiding that I just described, and suddenly, boom, now I'm having a Kundalini experience, right? And now, oh, energy thread is like starting to weave itself in, right? So now I'm having emptiness experiences and oneness experiences and energy experiences on top of that. Psyche thread opens up. Maybe I'm realizing how much of what I previously thought was me making decisions turns out to be like my trauma or my cultural programming, my soul is calling, whatever version of psyche thread suddenly opens up, and now I'm having those experiences, and is it can feel really chaotic. It can feel very disorienting to be braiding. You kind of like being shuffled around or pushed around between these different kinds of experiences. Um, and I think this is the place where people can run into, they can run into trouble. They can run into the kinds of thinking that's like, what is happening here? I'm so confused about what's happening. I'm not fitting into, you know, the the easy kind of like step by step model that my tradition told me I should have. Like first I'll experience this and then this and then this and then this. But now my experience feels like it's all over the place. Things are really confusing. I don't know who to turn to. That kind of experience, I think, in braiding can turn people to doubt themselves, doubt their practices, doubt their experiences. And especially if a tradition doesn't support a certain kind of experience, or doesn't really understand the certain kind of experience, and you're affiliated with one tradition, you're having these experiences from other traditions being braided in, or traditions, sorry, experiences from other threads braiding in to your experience. You can really feel like you're off the map and need help. Um, it's at that point that I think this map is particularly helpful, because it identifies a braiding process will take place. Um, but it doesn't prescribe, the model doesn't prescribe how the braiding will happen. And that's a really important point about this model. The model describes the threads, but it doesn't say how you're going to move down them. So some people move down, jump down, and, jump down really deep. Some people move really slowly down the threads. Some people hop around. They kind of like, yo-yo down and back up. We talked about that last time. Um, so the model also doesn't say how braiding should happen, or how it will happen. It's just that braiding does happen. So for you, you might experience oscillations every 6 months. Threads might open, you might fall into something for a couple of months, might be for a couple of hours. It might be like, I sit down for meditation and I'm like in a field of oneness, and then boom, suddenly it disappears, and now I'm in emptiness. And then like, later in the afternoon, I have an energy thing happening. It could be like, just a matter of hours or even minutes that these kind of braiding processes are happening. Um, you could be spending, a lot of time in that braiding process with one thread being more prevalent than the others. The others are kind of minor. Somebody else might be feeling like two or three threads are like much bigger. I think it's the strength of this model is um, to be accommodating of kind of any kind of braiding process. There's no prescriptive way that like this is how to properly do it. Um, Maybe I'll stop
And
there.
may I just add something? Because I think one of the most asked questions I hear on YouTube or when I'm in other groups is this doubt that people think they lost their awakening. Like, I
Right,
lost it, it's gone.
right.
How can I have it back? And I think this is just what you pointed out to is that, or it's just covered by another thread, so you're not aware, it's not in focus anymore, or and especially when it's the daily life thread, really feels like I'm completely out of spirituality right now. It's just all gone. Where is it? And then, like you say, suddenly it's back, and you're like, oh, where did that come from? So it really is one of the, yeah, things that people really, yeah, can have doubt around.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, where did my awakening go? Or like where did that particular flavor of awakening go? Like I was totally one with God. Like it was so beautiful and so like intimate, and the whole field was love and everything was one. And suddenly like everything's gone. Um, and it's just this bleak, dark like nothingness, right? Um, where did my spiritual experience go? Where did my oneness go, right? Um, you're still very deep in a spiritual process. You're just in another thread, right? You just jump to another thread. Yeah, so it can either be like the daily life thread, or it can be another thread, and there can be like grief and loss and confusion and you know striving and desire to get back to what I had before, right? For sure, all that stuff's really really normal and natural.
And then at the same time, because might be so focused on finding your awakening that you don't see that in front of you, like you just said, is another thread on top that's just waiting for you to be experienced, right?
That's right. That's the strength of this model, I think, in my opinion, is that it attunes you to paying attention to what's now coming on top. So that oneness with God was beautiful, but it's gone. So, but what's here now, right? And looking at what's here now is, an exploration, like looking at what's here now with an open-minded kind of willingness to explore something new. It is, I think, a more productive approach than sitting in an experience, in this new experience, like just wishing that it would be like it used to be, right? Right. So that the model can help you orient to what is here now. And maybe by placing it on a thread, like, oh, all of that oneness fell away, and and there's very much like a void right now. I can't find a self. I can't find God, right? These are just, they turn out to just be empty concepts. And then you're like, oh, this kind of sounds a little bit like emptiness. Let me look, at the Multidharma model and see, what this is all about. Might be helpful, because then the model can point you towards, deepening into the emptiness experience. Um, the model also, I think, can can provide you with a framework for seeking help and advice and teachings, depending on which thread you're in. So, you're in a Christian mysticism group, and you've got all this oneness with God happening, but now, God's fallen away and it's all emptiness. That group may or may not be the best place to support this next phase of your braiding process. And you might, I'm not saying do this, but you might want to, connect with some, I don't know, some Buddhist meditators who are really like very adept with emptiness for a while, in order to sink into that particular thread and what that thread has to offer. Um, and then maybe, 6 months later, your Kundalini opens and you're going into, some tantric group, some yoga group, mm, some Qigong group or something else, right? To get support with that braid. Um, and then the oneness comes back and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go back to my, Christian mysticism group. And it's not about like just kind of being a dilettante and like, fumbling around with spirituality. It's about what I'm talking about is in this awakening process, there will be times where certain kinds of advice is more helpful than others, right? I like to joke that I don't call the plumber when, my electricity in the house has a problem, right? When there's a problem with the electric system in the house, I call the electrician. And then when there's a problem with the plumbing, I call the plumber, right? So it's like that. It's about seeing spiritual teachings as tools to help with your process, rather than seeing them as ultimate truths that you subscribe to and belong to and affiliate with. Yeah.
And maybe we can, just because we said that we would talk a bit more about psyche thread. I think especially in the braiding process, when psyche's material, unconscious material shows up, that's often a point where people think, now I'm off the map, like you just said.
Totally.
Because this is like the opposite of what you get taught by people. Like there will be just rainbows and, light and love. And now you're down in the underworld with a psyche thread, and it doesn't feel like spiritual at all when you start with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, yeah, and I think this is where um, I think braiding kind of like understanding this as a braid, using that metaphor, I think can help to overcome what I think is a kind of a short-sighted mentality that that I hear a lot about sort of, conditioning, unconscious, shadow work and stuff like that when people talk about it. What I often hear them saying is, and this is in the traditions, so we've just kind of inherited this way of thinking and this way of speaking. The traditions that focus on oneness and emptiness and energy and so forth, a lot of them kind of just treat the psyche thread stuff as a sideshow, right? Like, oh, now I just see this conditioning is coming up, but these are just passing phenomena that are being cleared out, or these are just past karma that needs to be like released, or this is the shadow material is just stuff that needs to be kind of like purified, right? There's a lot of language like that in these traditions that imply that the psyche thread is somehow like just a side project. It'll come up at some point. You need to clear it out, and then you can get back to your real awakening, which is really just emptiness and oneness or whatever. Um, and I think about the psyche material quite differently than that. For me, it is a thread unto itself. It is part of it's a you know it's an equal part of the braid. Now, for some people, you might have a thinner thread. One thread might be thicker, one thread might be thinner. Some people just seem to gravitate towards different threads. Like some people will have more emptiness experiences than oneness experiences. Other people have a lot of energy experiences, and some people have it's there, but it's subtle. So some people have dramatic psyche thread stuff, and some people are more subtle. If you have dramatic psyche thread stuff, if psyche thread is really like a very strong thread for you, you're gonna have a lot of challenging experiences related to conditioning and trauma and other kinds of things. Um, that might be where you spend a lot of your time in the awakening process, deep in the psyche thread work, and it might be really ugly and messy and difficult. Um, and I think thinking about it as a sideshow that needs to kind of be processed so that I can move on is missing the point. Um, the psyche thread, it is itself a path of spiritual awakening. There's tons of traditions that value that path and that have really skillful teachings for how to navigate that path. And if that is the path that the thread that is opening for you, and it's the path that's being laid out for you, you kind of, I guess part of what I'm saying is you have to just sort of like embrace the form of awakening that has been handed to you. Um, for whatever reason, is it biological? Is it cultural? Is it karmic? Is it destiny? Is it God? I have no idea. Those are all ontological explanations that I don't do. But for whatever reason, you've been handed this particular form of awakening that is yours, to this particular form of braiding, this particular configuration of threads that's yours, and it's a matter of embracing what awakening is going to look like for you, and just like diving into it, surrendering to it, and sinking into the process. And if yours is a psyche thread heavy process, then you know that's what it'll look like. Um, yeah.
And in my own experience, what I had during the braiding is that when one thread is on top and it really wants to be taken fully, the others don't show up until you do. Like it's like a block or like something that first needs to be seen or felt through before then another thread can come back on top.
Yeah.
So trying to ignore it or find ways to navigate around it, at least for myself, didn't work. It was really there waiting. And once it was like opened or dissolved or welcomed or whatever the thing was that needed to be done, suddenly there was another experience of oneness or emptiness, which I didn't even prepare for. I didn't do any special exercises. It was more like a gate, like especially the psyche thread for me was like a doorway, like a gate that opened new and deeper realms of emptiness and oneness.
Yeah, that's really well said, Yvonne. Yeah, I like to talk about surrender as being sort of like, my verb for that kind of thing. It's like whatever the next step is in the braiding process, whatever is happening next, you might feel grief for what's gone. You might feel, like you want it back. You might feel disappointed with what you've got. You might feel this is really difficult or really challenging what I've got. But the key is, I think, to just, surrender and sink into whatever the next thing is. Um, and it may be for a while very kind of, oscillating back and forth between different things can be very, disorienting and unpredictable. But just surrendering to the unpredictability of it, the 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 disorientation of it, I think is good advice. And the other advice I think is helpful is just those guiding questions that we talked about last time. When you're working with a thread, to pick up the guiding questions of that thread, right? So the emptiness thread is what still seems real. Is it really like that? And the oneness thread is what still seems separate. Is it really like that? Energy thread, what still seems solid and non-dynamic. Is it really like that? And the psyche thread, what still seems like it can't be accepted and needs to be pushed away. Is it really like that? And if you just pull out those guiding questions, each thread's guiding questions, sort of surrender to where you are and apply the guiding question. I think it'll, of course, there's practices, that you will discover that you can be, exploring, that you could be, taught, that you can be reading about. There's all kinds of practices to do, but ultimately, I think the surrendering to where you are and sort of digging into the guiding questions, I think, um, will help you to navigate the braids. Um, yeah. So should we should we move on from braiding, Yvonne? Are we?
Yeah, I mean,
Nice. Or
what happens the more you braid, and like you can see in a braid, is that it gets maybe like more and more like a whole, like you don't see the thread so much, but you more and more see the braid the longer the braid gets. And also that there is like yeah, this is already probably integration, that you have this like coloring of the threads to each other thread, like this whole process that then merges, maybe slowly you don't even notice, you still think of threads, and then suddenly you notice, oh wait a moment, I can't really identify this as the experience of emptiness or oneness, but there's some, yeah, kind of integration happening, and I think that's probably something we could just, yeah, focus on now. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So right. So in this model, we're not necessarily concerned with like how many braids there are or how long the braiding process takes place. Like that can be different from different people. Like some people will have like, you know, 25 different knots in their braid that they've made. Somebody else might have six, right? Somebody else might have three, somebody else might have 52, right? That doesn't matter. Somebody might have been braiding for 30 years, somebody might have been braiding for 3 days. It doesn't matter. The the point that you just made is that at some point, if you've opened threads and you've kind of like in some way start to interweave them together, this braiding process of oscillating between these different kinds of experiences at some point the braiding process is gonna kind of like bleed over or blend into an integration process. So some people might fall into integration really quickly. Some people it may take a long time, but eventually you're gonna start to see that the threads that previously, like you said, the threads that previously seemed like distinct experiences, distinct identities, distinct ontologies, distinct worldviews that seemed incompatible with each other now start to seem like, wait, they're actually aspects of the same thing. Like, wait, oh, before it's like, I was one with God and then God disappeared and I was, everything was void, everything was empty. But now I'm starting to see that, that God and the void are the same thing. They're like two aspects of the same thing, or they are like intertwined in a way that's inseparable. Um, or you're braiding. The other example we used was you're braiding emptiness with daily life, like you know everything's unreal, and my work is just kind of like meaningless. Or I'm at work focused on the work thing, and my spirituality is taking a back seat. But now I kind of see how like my workplace is like this venue or this arena for my spirituality to um, extend out into the world, something like that. Um, or and it can be. I've just given like two examples of integration, but all of the braids, all of the different threads, you can have them integrate, two by two, or you can have like three or four, or even like the daily life, all integrated together. I think, so different people will experience integration differently. Um, they might experience like, I can see how emptiness and fullness or emptiness and oneness are part of the same thing, how they are actually just two aspects of the same thing. But then when I have Kundalini, it seems really different, right? Or my conditioning is something that seems really different, right? But then like the conditioning and the Kundalini might braid, might integrate over here, and then it's like I've got this integration and that integration, right? However it happens, it recognizing it as an integration process. Oh, the things I previously thought of as separate are now starting to come together. I think that's the key, to recognize that the integration is happening and now focusing on the integration as the thing that you're focused on, right? Like it's always focusing on what's in front of you instead of wishing that you could have these pure experiences that you used to have in the past. It's actually just like, I think it's more skillful to look at what's happening now. Oh, things are coming together. That's really curious. That's really interesting. It seems so paradoxical. How could it be that emptiness is the same as God? How could that really be? Let me explore that. Let me look into that. Let me investigate that. And through that kind of like orientation towards integration, I think what this eventually leads to is an integration where all of the threads are seen as being aspects of the same thing. Um, you know, this reality is this multifaceted reality, which is also totally empty, also totally divine, also completely energetic, also a projection of my mind, and also just an ordinary kind of world with ordinary stuff, um, simultaneously. And in full integration, you can see all of that, and it's kind of just all there simultaneously present at the same time. And you might be able to just kind of shift your perspective a little bit and see it this way or that way or the other way, or you can just like sit and just all of it is present at the same time. So like a full integration will have that multifaceted, multidimensional kind of experience to it. Um, it'll also have, for many people, for most people, I think, a multifaceted identity and a multifaceted ontology, multifaceted worldview, um, as well. So like whereas before in braiding, it might seem like you're oscillating between sometimes I feel like I'm God and sometimes I just feel like I'm Pierce and like where did God go? And sometimes, I feel like this incredible like being of light with like energy, you know, exuding from my chakras. And then sometimes I just feel like none of that's there. Uh, that's a kind of like a braided identity. In integration, you might say something like, I can see that I am God and I am the void and I am just Pierce at the same time. Um, and then you could also have the braided ontologies turn into integrated ontologies. So if you're creating worldviews around these threads, which many people do, like they experience the oneness thread and they're like, oh, ultimate reality is that only consciousness exists. Or they experience the emptiness thread and they're like, oh, ultimate reality is that everything's empty. Or they experience the energy thread, oh, ultimate reality is that everything's just energy. And in braiding, you might be flipping around between those and be like, wait, what is reality? Because I keep seeing it in different ways. Now you're just like, oh, an integrated ontology would just be like, oh, these are all true, each in their own way. They're all like the universe is holographic with these different kinds of dimensions to them that I can see all of them simultaneously. Um, yeah, so that's integration.
And I used to say in the German talk I gave, this sounds like a good happy end to me. Like, hey, let's stay there.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely what I think so. So a lot of traditions value one thread, and if they're going to value one thread, they often will define enlightenment as the end of that one thread. So I'm very familiar with sort of like old school Theravada Buddhism that is very, very focused on the emptiness thread. And it's like their definition of enlightenment is you experience the end of the emptiness thread. So that's like a full cessation, a full, experience of nibbana, you know, 4 times. And you're now an arhat, which is like the peak of that system. But an arhat has to be a monastic and has to be renounce the world and like live in a monastic community, right? So that's like their definition of a fully awakened, totally enlightened being is that they got to the end of the emptiness thread and they abandoned the world. Um, so I'm also aware of, some other traditions like, Christian mysticism, let's say, where it's like the end of the oneness thread, like that person is like completely unified with God, united with God, and they live a life of service. Like that's their definition of the end. Certain schools' definition of the end of spirituality is this oneness thread ideal. But there are a lot of traditions that advocate integration and that point to the integration of 2 or 3 or 4 threads and point to the full integration of those as being the end goal. So here I might think about uh, like tantric Hinduism, for example, like Kashmiri Shaivism or traditions like that, where the fully enlightened person is totally steeped in oneness because they see like I am that, or they see like the merger of the Atman into the Brahman or whatever. Everything is one, but also they have fully cultivated the energy systems of the body, opened up all the chakras, and like produced this body of light that is like totally energetic, and then merged together, the divinity of the oneness with this energy into kind of like a fully divine um, subtle energy system, a body that is fully divine with this subtle energy system that is you know um, uh, synonymous with the goddess, right, or with the birth and death of the universe, right, all of that sort of packed into one being. um, and that's their definition of the end, of of ultimate enlightenment. Um, so
And
it's like
even if you,
depending on which
sorry.
tradition, they're going to have a different goal. They're going to have a different hero at the end of the path, and they're going to have a different idea of what we're aiming for. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted just to say that even if you don't follow any tradition, just what you the way you shared this end goal of integration, like it's multifaceted, everything's available. I have access to divinity, I have access to emptiness, I have access to energy, even without any tradition. That sounds like a superhero. That sounds like, yeah, this is what I want. I mean, that sounds just great. So
Yeah.
the
So
thing is,
every stage of the way, I think, like if it's a really powerful initial awakening experience into any of these threads, like you kind of feel like you're enlightened right there. The first awakening experience into the oneness thread, and you're just like, oh, I'm God. Wow, this is like I'm enlightened. That's done. That's the, end of story, right? And then of course you realize like, oh wait, there's so much more here. You start working down the threads and so forth. But like at any point when there's some kind, you reach some kind of milestone, some kind of like amazing sort of experience happens. People are quite tempted, I think, to be like, oh wow, this is the end. I'm enlightened. um, Certainly at integration, when, like you said, when this whole multifaceted reality kind of snaps into place and everything is, all of the previous oscillations between the threads and the braiding process are all resolved into one kind of seamless whole, the seamless totality that includes everything. Um, yeah, there's no way that you experience that without feeling like you're completely enlightened. Like this is the end of everything. Um, yeah,
which it
and
actually,
that's
like
what
you just
most
said, is in some models, this is the end, but this
yeah.
is not the end in yours. So,
Well, so yeah, so and I want to remind just to make a reminder here that like multi-dharma is not establishing a hierarchy between these different ends. So I really want to stress that. I probably said that, a dozen times last last conversation. I want to say it again here because I'm not saying that the goal of being an arhat or the goal of, arriving at the end of the oneness thread is less desirable than the goal of, being fully integrated with the threads, or that's less desirable than anything else. Or like it's higher level to be, integrated than it is to be an arhat. I'm not saying that at all. That's like a complete misunderstanding of the um, of the multi-dharma model, if that's what you're taking from it. Um, I think we talked about like the ecosystem last time, right? Like I think of this territory, right? And I'm just describing the different residents of the territory. It's like you go on the savannah and like, oh, over here we have, the giraffe area, and over there is where the lion's den is, and over there's a bog where the hippos are lounging around, and and giraffes aren't better than hippos, and hippos aren't better than lions or whatever. It's just like they live in these different parts of the ecosystem. And so yeah, I think we need um we need giraffes, we need hippos, we need lions to have a healthy ecosystem. We need all of them to be there doing their thing, right? And so spirituality is the same. We need the people who are totally like steeped in emptiness, who like arrive at that endpoint, who take that to its ultimate endpoint, fully embody the emptiness thread, and that's what they do. Just like we need people who take oneness all the way to the end and fully and just stay there, fully steeped in it, fully embodying what does this end of the oneness thread really provide for us? What does it look like? And they teach from that place. They invite people into that place. Beautiful. We need that. We need people doing that all across the territory. Um, and so some people are in the integration kind of space, right? They're I don't know, they're the zebras in my metaphor. Um, and they're fully just being zebras, right? They're fully like showing us what that looks like. And that's beautiful. We need them to be doing that. Um, yeah. So I'm not saying there's any hierarchy at all. Um, they will argue amongst themselves about which position's better for sure. Like people like all the hippos are like it's better to be a hippo, right? And all the lions are like you hippos are deluded because like lion being a lion is the real deal. They'll all argue amongst themselves that they've got the ultimate truth. But Multidharma doesn't play that game. Multidharma just gives you the lay of the territory as a whole. And it might be, and also it might be that you, the way that you're configured for whatever reason, happen to be a zebra. And so just aiming for being a hippo is gonna create a lot of like conflict and suffering for you when you just are a zebra and you should be a zebra, right? And so I think people, if you're really attuned to one of these threads and you're kind of configured for that thread and you're configured to sort of like land in a certain place and really, really, develop that capacity of that place. And that is who you are. That is how you're built. And nothing wrong with that. Why shoot for something else, right? Why shoot to be a zebra when you're a lion, right? Be a lion, be a great lion. Um, yeah, anyway, we talked a lot about that last time, I think, in terms of getting started with spirituality. But now I think I'm also saying the same exact thing about like the ends of spirituality. It's like it's about becoming fully, who you are, and not trying to fit into being somebody else.
And sometimes you just don't know. You might have an idea that you're a giraffe and you live amongst giraffes, and then suddenly you realize, oh gosh, I
Yeah,
think I'm a lion.
yeah, 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 and sometimes you realize you're a lion because you're just living there among the giraffes, and suddenly you're like, God, I can't take it anymore. And you pounce on one of those giraffes and eat it, right?
Yeah.
Or something. It's like, oh, whoops. I had this like repressed kind of like pent up kind of, frustration or something that just kind of came out in an unskillful way or in a very dramatic way or something. Yeah. So people need to discover, they need to discover their strengths, need to discover their orientation. And yeah, I think again, my model doesn't have any specific kind of diagnostic technique, it'd be great, so, scan your fingerprint and I can tell you which thread you're in or which version of enlightenment you should aim for. I think that's kind of a fantasy. I think what we're really stuck with as human beings is just trial and error and kind of like going with what we feel resonant with and kind of like discovering our inner kind of guide, our inner intuition. It's learning to separate that from our kind of like wants and desires and thoughts and just really learning to tune into what is most skillful and most beneficial for us and turning towards that. Um, yeah, so I think we're just kind of stuck with doing it the old-fashioned messy way. I don't think AI will have an answer for us. I don't think, there's some app you can download. Yeah, we just got to do this the old-fashioned way.
Find out yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to touch on release, there's a question that we might take before that in the
Yeah.
chat that is from Joe, and it is there a recommended question for the everyday life half thread?
Mm. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, yeah. I didn't really give the daily life thread its own chapter in the book. Maybe I should. Maybe that was a shortcoming of the book. But um, yeah, daily life. I think the question there would be something along the lines of, what aspects of my daily life have not yet been fully transformed by my spiritual realizations. Right. So like what parts of my life am I still kind of like just kind of going with the old comfortable kind of routine, um, and not and I haven't sort of reconsidered, recalibrated based on what I know, based on what I've realized, based on where I am now. And that might be scary. It might be it might be um really difficult to suddenly realize, oh, I've wasted 30 years in a career that is not serving anymore. Um, I've wasted 30 years, with friendships that aren't serving anymore. I mean, even with, certain relationships that haven't been served, that aren't serving anymore. It could be really difficult to really, really fully integrate spirituality with the daily life thread. But on in this process, it's got to happen. So, um, it will have its challenges as well. But just learning to look at that thread, look at the daily life thread, and just where am I still practicing unskillful habits? Where am I still disconnected and ego driven? Even though I've seen that the ego is even though I've seen the ego as an illusion and we're all one, but yet still I go to work and I work in an industry or I have a position where I'm you know seek and destroy everybody else, right, or something like that, right? Yeah, so there may be changes that need to be made. Um, yeah, hopefully that's a helpful starting point.
And what comes up now too is in the integration phase, you mentioned this that we can't say all because then we do ontologies, but let's say most people experience something that's called fear barrier, which is that little
Mm.
tiny bit that you don't want to integrate, that you just still want to,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
you know, hold a bit apart. Maybe you can say something about this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I want to clarify or just be sure that I've mentioned that so it's not the case that you go all the way down to the end of the thread and then you start braiding, you get to the end of the braid and then you start integrating, right? Like that, this isn't a stage-based model where it's like stage one is this, stage two is this, stage three is that. It's a process-based model, and those processes can overlap. They will overlap. So you open a thread, you start deepening in one thread, you open another thread, you start deepening that thread. You're braiding them, but as you're braiding them, you're still deepening them, right? And as you're integrating them, you're deepening them even further. And in my experience, I think most people don't arrive at the ends of the threads until they're actually pretty integrated. Like the integration, right? Think of like a braid, a long hair that's been braided. Like you need thread in order to braid, right? You need thread in order to integrate. Um, as you're braiding, as you're integrating, you're still working with the threads. You're still deepening into the threads. You don't get to the end of the threads until like the bottom of the integration, right? The bottom of the braid. Um, yeah, so in terms of fear, I actually think fear can arise. Like some people are kind of fear prone. I had a couple of fear gates kind of at different parts of the process. Some people are more fear prone than others. Some people just have fear all the way down, constantly. Some people it's kind of like, it's mostly not there. But I do talk about this kind of like this fear gate, uh, at sort of the end of the integration process where yeah you're integrating everything's integrated together except for one last thing, which is like I accept everything else, but this one last thing, like letting go of that, it's just impossible. And it's usually like a really core, um very, very core sort of unconscious belief or orientation that's running in the background somewhere that is like, the last holdout of integration. Um, so for me, that was something about control and needing to control reality in order to feel safe. That was my version of it. What was your version of it, Iman?
It's hard to tell, actually.
Uh,
I think it was something like this. Before the release, what I realized is I was really holding on to the fact that I could not control reality, but could control the spiritual process. Like
Right.
I was able to create experiences that were like emptiness or oneness experiences. And I was so happy to finally have found that it was obvious that I didn't want to lose it again once I found it finally, you know?
Yeah.
Because like you just said in integration, often what happens at the integration and the endpoint of a thread often happen simultaneously. So I found it really like kind of a bit sadistic from life that I had my deepest openings to emptiness and oneness just at the end. And then shortly after they were taken away from me, and I was really like, not happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so fear gate can be around. Yeah, it sounds like both of us had some version of like control, wanting to be in control, wanting to be here, like a fear of annihilation, a fear of like being gone, being disappearing. It can be a fear of allowing. I guess that one would be more of like an emptiness flavored fear gate. A psyche thread flavored fear gate might be something like really allowing that one part of my shadow to come forward and be okay with it. That one last remaining part of my shadow that I just really shoved really far down into the basement and really don't want to see and really don't want to deal with. That could be a very fearful sort of like a fear gate. So fear gate is like it's like a blockage that you're putting up, a resistance that you're putting up to the integration process happening, or the threads deepening, or some other part of this process. Fear gate is like a strong no. I'm anything else but not that. I just can't. I'll crumble. I'll be destroyed. Um, and I think everybody has to hit a fear gate. I think I mean it may not be a big deal. It might be, your fear only lasts a couple seconds or whatever, but I think everybody has if you haven't hit a fear gate, it's kind of like, did you really let go of the very, very, very most core bottom, deepest, darkest fear of yours. If so, I think there has to be some, maybe there, in my view, there probably has to be some kind of ultimate, ultimate last little piece of resistance that lets go. Um, and yeah, and so when the last piece of resistance lets go, deep into the integration process, at the bottom of the integration process, that last little fear gate is let go. Um, then you start a process that I talk about as being the release of the threads. Um, yeah. So should we get into that, or do you want
Oh
to?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think that we have still some time left, and to me that's the most interesting part because it's not spoken very often in other traditions because they end at another point.
Yeah. So different traditions end in different places. Some of them talk about release of the threads. I'm aware of several that do talk about release of the threads. So release of the threads, again, it's not a better than, it's not a more advanced than kind of situation. It's just like it's a different part of the terrain. But for some people, they will be in this really deeply integrated place that you just talked about, or that we just talked about, and have this kind of like this like final resistance is let go of. And then it seems like the threads just sort of like vanish. Um, Most people, in my experience, describe this as like the threads themselves just sort of like disappeared one day. I looked for them and couldn't find them anymore. Other people, like a minority of people, but it is my case, describe this as like I saw that I could let go of them, and I did. So I think it can come in different versions of release. So is the thread releasing you, or are you releasing the thread? It's just sort of a way of talking about. There isn't really a difference, but it's just a way of talking. Um, what happens with the release of the threads is, I think most people would say it would describe it as primarily being something like the whole awakening process, the whole of spirituality just suddenly became meaningless. The whole thing just kind of just disappeared out from under you. The whole, all of the realizations of awakening, the kind of the identities that came around with that, like I am God, I am, emptiness, I am, the goddess, whatever, fall away. The ontologies, the ideas about, what ultimate reality is like. Oh, ultimate reality is, everything's consciousness or everything's empty or everything's energy. Like all those ontologies fall away. Just kind of like all of the questions about spirituality just kind of like turn out to be meaningless and uninteresting. Um, the whole thing is dropped. The whole thing just kind of like falls, crumbles. And that is, again, this model doesn't talk about stages. So we're not talking about you know a discrete moment in time where suddenly it goes from stage whatever to stage whatever. It's a process that takes place over time. But a lot of people, most people do experience a moment where there's a significant reduction, a significant release of the threads. Um, it can be very dramatic. Again, like some people are prone to these kind of very dramatic shifts, and it can also be very subtle. For me, it was just like a very like that last fear gate, very, very, very kind of subtle sort of relaxation. Oh, I don't need to worry about that. Oh, I'm trying to control reality. Oh, I can let that go. And then boom, the whole thing just kind of disappeared. But it was like a very kind of subtle moment. And then I have a friend who had this like massive sort of like, all the bells and whistles kind of experience of the same thing. So I don't know if you want to talk about your experience, Yvonne, but the a lot of people have sort of like can pinpoint a moment where this, they just woke up one day or they were taking a walk or they were doing something, and it's just like all of spirituality suddenly just the bubble popped, the whole thing became meaningless, the whole thing disappeared. Um, yeah,
I agree. I think this is in the whole journey, this has been really one of the rare moments where I can really point the day and even the time of the day when it happened, because it was like, yeah, I turned around and the whole thing just was gone. And to me, like, I was one of those people. I didn't have like, oh yeah, finally it's gone. It was really like shocking. It's like, I took the wrong way. I overshot the what other people just said, like, you overshot. How do you say the word? You overshot.
overshot the runway.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's the thing I
yeah,
was looking for. It, like, something's wrong here. This is not what I expected. I want my threads back. I want my experiences back. So I had a lot of ranting around this kind of thing that happened.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So right. So a lot of people react differently to the experience. And again, it's not if it's not on the map, then you're not really kind of expecting this to happen. Then when it happens, you're just like, wait, what just happened? Like, where did all of it go? Where did all of that integration that a minute ago I was like, I was God, I was the whole universe, I was, this multifaceted, dimensional, being, enlightened being, and now it's just all gone. Again, it's about, yeah, but like we said earlier, it's about sort of not wishing for the past, but actually looking at what's here, what's in front of you in this moment. So yeah, so you described having a little bit of kind of grief or a little bit of shock, a little bit of sort of like, oh, I want it back. I've also heard people, some friends of ours, kind of go into this in the opposite direction, which is like, oh, I now know that all of spirituality is bullshit. Like they go into this kind of like rejection sort of mode, like, oh, I now know that this, this is all bullshit. Um, some people go into yeah, just different kinds of reactions to the experience. But I think with time, that's why this is a process, right? Uh, Over time, um, you acclimate to the new normal. That always happens with every transition, every step, every kind of new realization is it seems so amazing at first and that or so different at first. So the contrast is so notable at first that it's really kind of pay a lot of attention to the contrast, and then over time it just becomes it's just not even a thing that's noticed anymore. It just kind of is the way it is, and I don't even really pay attention to it. So yeah, so the absence of spirituality, could be something that really is notable at first, and you have all kinds of opinions about and create all kinds of like ideas about. Um, but then over time, you sort of sink into the new normal, and it's just like, oh well, you know, we can just move on with life. All of the energy and all the time and attention and um, concern that I had about the threads, about different kinds of ways of experiencing reality, all the ideas I had about like what it meant and where it was all going and all of that can just be they're just like dropped, and it frees up a lot of bandwidth to focus on other things. Um, just go back to ordinary life. Maybe start a new job, maybe focus on the kids, maybe I don't know, whatever your thing is. But just to be able to do it without this whole sort of apparatus of spirituality kind of, in the picture. It's gone from the picture.
And as you also said in other situations, is that also the threads model becomes irrelevant in a sense, the ontology of the thread model. It doesn't make any sense unless you study it, you like to talk about it like we do. It's like what we do, but there is not really like a identity or worldview still tied into even the threads model. It's just part of the whole like spiritual thing that drops.
Yeah. So from this released position, what becomes apparent is that all of the threads, all of the viewpoints from all of the positions along the thread, from the bottoms of the threads, from braiding, from integration, even deep, deep, deep integration, all of those perspectives are rendered meaningless by the dropping of the threads or the whole process, the whole kind of like idea of awakening, the whole idea of any of these kinds of different viewpoints or different ways of seeing reality, the whole thing goes up in smoke. And so yeah, at that point there's like no model could possibly be in any way accurate or uh, real or taken seriously, including the threads model. Yeah, like any model at that point is just a way of talking, just a way of maybe pointing at something, but seen to be a futile kind of exercise or seen to be just complete nonsense. Yeah, so here I am like talking about this model, writing books about this model and so forth, but I think it's all nonsense also, right? It's a helpful tool. That's it. If it's not helpful to you, great. Don't worry about it. If it is helpful to you, awesome. Use it. Um, there's no investment in models of any kind as being, accurate or being reflections of reality in any way.
And there's a question in the chat from John. He asks, "Do you think it can be both, all gone and not gone?" And I think this is a good question that also,
John, that gets right to the heart of it.
yeah, exactly.
So the way that I have been speaking is reflecting the change or the shift from integration into the thread release. And initially, I think for most people, initially you just notice, oh, it's all gone. Like everything, the threads disappeared, the whole model, the whole sort of like awakening experience. I no longer have access to it, or I no longer am experiencing it. The whole thing's gone. Um, but over time, I think that perspective kind of matures into or that idea that the focus on what's now gone kind of matures into a either a not caring or it's insignificant or it's meaningless or it's just not interesting or it's just impossible to even say whether the awakening process is real or not, whether reality is like this or like that, whether the model is accurate or not, whether is reality empty or divine, or energetic or psyche or integrated. Just those kinds of questions themselves disappear. And so is it gone, not gone? Is it both gone and not gone? Is it neither gone nor not gone? Like, just none of it matters. Like, none of it even registers anymore because the whole thing is um, just collapses. What would be a good metaphor? It would be like, yeah, it would be like if you asked me, um, is Santa Claus gone or not gone? And I was like, well, Santa Claus is a myth. So like, how do you want to say that? Well, like a lot of people believe in it. So Santa Claus is here. Like, or you could say Santa Claus is not here because, it's a myth. At the end of the day, does it matter? That question, does it matter at all? The question is meaningless because it's a question about something that's meaningless, asking me to pin down something that's meaningless. And so I answer the question however you want, right? Santa Claus here, not here, who cares? It doesn't matter. If I'm talking to a kid who believes in Santa Claus, sure, I can make Santa Claus here. If that's helpful in the moment, absolutely. You can ask me, to pin down does Santa Claus actually exist or not? What what do you want me to say? Like it's not a it's not a question that arises. It's not a question that's in any way important. Um, so apply that to spirituality, right? Is reality really, really empty, or is it really consciousness that's absolute? Is it really God? Is it this, that, or the other? Is it really about integration? Is it really about, this, that, or the other? You're just talking about Santa Claus, right? It's the questions, um, the questions don't come up, the questions aren't relevant, the questions don't say anything about reality in any way. Um, sure, if you're in a place where it's helpful to talk in these ways and think in these ways, um, I can talk in these ways and think in these ways in order to help with navigating the current situation. But is it ultimately like that? Yeah, not really worth. It's not really possible to say or worth debating. I don't know, Yvonne, am I being
Yep.
helpful with that
I think you are,
metaphor?
and there's another thing. I mean, the question becomes irrelevant, and at the same time, the perspective taker, the note taker, that could go and look for the answer. That's one of the things that usually we were talking when we're talking about release is it's gone too. Like in the spiritual process, usually you get this meta level of an observer or someone who's taking notes of what's going on, and that also collapses with the release of the threads. So who could possibly go and look for the answer to find the answer for that question? And so yeah, it becomes kind of impossible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's where I was going to go next, talking about the autopilot. But yes, so
Yeah.
yeah, so the I think one way to think about this is when we started in part one of the conversation, I was defining an awakening experience as being like you're initially your identity is totally fused into the narrative self. Like I am Pierce and all these roles, and the world sort of like revolves around this center. And an awakening experience, I talked about this as being like a either a gradual or a sudden kind of like popping out of the narrative self, and the identity is now located in some place that has a broader perspective. I see that I am this field of energy, and Pierce is part of that, but I see that I'm something much bigger, or I see that I'm God, and Pierce is part of that, but I see that I'm something much bigger, or I see non-self, and that Pierce is like a little kind of thought loop that does, certain things, but I can see that there is no self now. So there's some kind of like extraction out of the separate self into this kind of like meta level position. And then the whole awakening process is about, occupying this meta level position or different meta level positions that are like braided together, integrated together. Um, but but the whole process is happening, the whole time the process is happening, you're there in some form, kind of witnessing the process taking place. There's a witness, or it can be more subtle than that. It can just be like it could be something like awareness or consciousness that's like witnessing things, or it can be more subtle than that and just be like there's just presence. Might be a word people use, or there's an experiencer of some kind. There's experience happening, is kind of like a very thin version of it. Um, there's always something separate from the experience that is registering experience as taking place. There's always some sense of like presence, or some sense of like the space or the container in which the experience is taking place, and that container can be really, really, really thin. It can fluctuate, with the energy. It can disappear with emptiness. It can be really vast with oneness. But there's always sort of like a relating to reality that's happening in some way. I'm relating to reality. I'm seeing it as one. I'm integrating with it. Now I'm disappearing and not present from it. But there's always like a relationship being implied between this subject and the object. Yeah, and I think what's happening here, at least for most people that I've talked to, not everybody recognizes it, not everybody sort of articulates it this way, but there's in the release of the threads, there's a letting go of all of those ways of relating. So the subject doesn't need to relate to the objects in any particular way. There's so you know a lot of the awakening process is about trying to like refine the relation between the subject and the object in certain ways. Um, and in this, once the thread's released, then it's just like that whole project disappears. You don't need to see reality in any which way. Don't need to relate to reality in any which way. Reality can just be whatever it is. There's no reason to try to change it. There's also no reason to track it. There's no reason to sort of like pay attention to how reality is showing up, because it doesn't matter how it shows up. And so you can have the kind of experience that you're talking about, where it's just sort of like, um, this monitoring function that goes around kind of like monitoring reality and checking on reality and looking at what does reality look like? What does my experience look like? Checking on experience, that whole sort of monitoring function just becomes irrelevant. Um, it can disappear or not. I mean, it can be there or not, but it just doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And I call that, I have a metaphor for that, which is I call that autopilot. So um, it's like previously in all in throughout the awakening process, or even pre-awaken, there always seemed to be a pilot. There seemed to be some kind of like person in the cockpit that was, you know, maybe initially thought it was really flying the plane, right? And thought like, oh, I'm actually like the pilot. And then through the awakening process, kind of realized, oh, it's not really me that's flying the plane, you know. I guess I'm more of a co-pilot, just kind of like watching this plane fly itself. Um, and then, but this final thread release is kind of just like the illusion of being, even being a co-pilot, just kind of like falls away. I don't want to say illusion, the experience of being a co-pilot falls away. And it's just like the plane's flying itself with nobody watching it. Um, so what that's like experientially, I would say is just like, you know, just the organism goes on autopilot and just like does what it does. And there's nobody needing to experience reality or experience or um, really relate to experience in any way, and just you can't even really say whether experience is there or not. It's kind of like the Santa Claus question. um, yeah, help me
So
out on what else
so
would.
so the answer to the question would be, it might be that the threads are still here, but who knows? I
Yeah,
mean, it
exactly.
could be that oneness is still playing out, emptiness is still here, energy is still here, psychic is still here,
Well,
but
I would certainly
who?
say it's not like the opposites are here. So it's not like things are reified, separated, non-dynamic, and not projected from my mind, right? So it's not like going back to being like pre-awakened when everything seemed really like, reified and solid and real in so many ways and separate. It's not that. Um, but yeah, are these threads, perspectives there or not? Just can't kind of it can't really be pinned down. So yeah, the other way to say it is to say like the perspectives of the threads have become so integrated into the system, right? Because this is what comes after integration. It's like every last bit has been integrated to the point where none of them stand out as being something interesting or um, notable anymore. Like the perspectives of the threads are so integrated that you don't have to pay attention to them anymore. They just are the way they are. Like I don't go around paying attention to my thumbnail. Like, wow, my thumbnail is so integrated into my body, and it's so interesting how it's such a part of my body. Like I don't ever think that unless there's a problem with my thumb, right? And then I will look at it and be like, oh wow, that I just ordinarily do not reflect or spend any energy whatsoever reflecting on my thumbnail and how well it's integrated or how it's not integrated, or it just never comes up. It's just not a question that comes up. And so something like that is going on here too. Like, the perspectives of the emptiness thread are just like so integrated that they're not worth paying attention to.
We are at the end of our time.
Yeah.
And
Well, I feel like we threw a lot of metaphors at this
yeah.
um end of the dropping of the threads or release of the threads thing.
Yeah.
I think I mean, it's kind of hard to explain the perspective of any position within the territory. It's hard to explain the perspective, any particular perspective from any particular territory to people who aren't there, right? Like somebody trying to explain the bottom of the emptiness thread to somebody who isn't there is not going to be able to do it. Somebody explaining the bottom of the full integration to somebody who's not there, again, it's not going to be able to do it. Obviously, words cannot capture the experience, and we can just kind of like play with metaphors and play with words and try to point to the experience. Um, but we're always going to be doing a bad job of capturing the experience with words, right? So that's kind of maybe the final thing to say, not only about the trying to describe, the release of the threads, but just about the whole model on the whole. Like the whole model is constructed out of words, so it's always going to be just a provisional kind of like pointer to what we're talking about here and not the actual experience itself. It's always just going to be words. Um, so please don't take the words too seriously. But if the words can be helpful, great. If the words are confusing, then never mind.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you for sharing everything what you shared today. Um, if you want to learn more about what we just shared, there's a website that's called multidharma.net. I think you also find it when you go to the Awakening Together website. There is a sign up for office hours. So if you want to learn more or have a chat or come with your questions, Piers has a regular office hours that is, yeah, going from June, I think. Yeah, May, you want to say
Yeah,
something?
I'm taking a little break in the summer, but they'll start up in mid-July. So
Okay. Oh,
um,
mid-July. Okay,
yeah, so
gotcha.
people
So you
can.
can sign up now and then you get a message when the office hours are back.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not a therapist, I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm an ideas guy, I'm a professor, that's my training. So this isn't like a satsang or like a spiritual teaching kind of thing. It's just like, if you have questions about the model, questions about the ideas, it's just a place to chat about those kinds of things, and you're welcome to join.
All right. Thank you, Marisol, and everyone who was here today, the hosts, the guests, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching our satsang. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to join us live, please remember you can do so by visiting our website at awakening-together.org. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary. Again, our website is awakening-together.org. Remember to click the bell for more notifications and subscribe.